In this video, we will step into the last moments no one was supposed to survive. These crimes were not committed by strangers in the dark. They were carried out by people sworn to protect. Badges, uniforms, authority, used as weapons. Imagine being restrained, unarmed, compliant, believing the system is holding you safe, only to realize the danger is standing right in front of you. Each case shatters the same promise. That power exists to shield the vulnerable. Instead, it became the tool that ended lives. This is not about mistakes. This is about decisions made when victims had nowhere left to run. David Kingsley, State, New York, age 44, sentenced to life. The first thing that grabs you in the David Kingsley case is not the violence itself. It is the certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from body cam footage that never blinks, never forgets, never looks away. In December 2024, inside Massey Correctional Facility, a handcuffed man lay restrained on the floor while correction officers surrounded him. Among them was David Kingsley, a uniformed employee of the state, trained to control, trained to restrain, trained to stop. Instead, he escalated. Robert Brooks was already in custody. His hands were cuffed behind his back. No weapon. No active resistance. The confrontation began as something minor. Words, tension, ego. Then it tipped. Kingsley grabbed Brooks by the neck. Other officers followed. Blows landed. Weight pressed down. Knees, fists, bodies piling onto a man who could not shield himself. Brooks' breathing slowed. Then it stopped. The autopsy later showed severe internal injuries. Trauma consistent with sustained force. He died on that floor, restrained, overwhelmed, and unheard. This was not a split-second decision. That is what makes it disturbing. The body cam footage showed time passing. It showed Brooks no longer fighting. It showed officers continuing anyway. In a system already under scrutiny for patterns of abuse across New York State prisons, this incident did not appear as an outlier. It looked like confirmation. Investigators would later describe the scene not as control gone wrong, but as collective violence normalized by environment and silence. Public reaction was immediate. The footage circulated. The outrage followed. In February 2025, Kingsley and 5 other correction officers were arrested. Prosecutors did not rely on witness memory or conflicting testimony. They relied on video. Frame by frame, breath by breath. At trial in Oneida County, jurors watched a restrained inmate die while officers remained in control of the scene. The defense argued chaos. Prosecutors argued choice. Repeated choice. Sustained choice. By October 2025, the jury returned its verdict. Kingsley was found guilty of second-degree murder, along with additional charges related to assault and falsification of reports. It was a rare outcome. Correction officers are seldom convicted at this level, even more rarely for murder. The message was clear: restraint carries responsibility and abuse carries consequence. On December 19, 2025, Robert Bauer sentenced Kingsley to 25 years to life in prison, with an additional manslaughter conviction attached. The court acknowledged the power imbalance. A man in custody. A man in uniform. One unable to escape. One sworn to protect. This was not a tragedy without blame. It was violence with witnesses. What makes this case linger is not just that Robert Brooks died. It is that he died while the system was watching itself. Cameras on. Policies written. Training completed. And still, the line was crossed. Kingsley's sentence did more than punish a single officer. It forced a reckoning. When authority becomes aggression and silence becomes consent, the damage does not end at one body on a prison floor. It spreads. And this time, the law answered back. Erin Sharma, State, Florida, age 49, sentenced to life. What makes the Erin Sharma case so unsettling is that there was no struggle caught on camera, no chaotic burst of violence in a hallway. The killing did not happen in front of her. And yet, It happened because of her. In 2008, inside Federal Correctional Complex Coleman, Sharma was not reacting to danger. She was arranging it, calmly, methodically, with the authority of a federal correctional officer and the silence of a locked door. Sharma worked the tiers. She knew the inmates. She knew their reputations, their histories, their alliances. She also knew how information moved inside prison walls. The victim, according to later testimony, had been labeled a possible informant. In prison culture, that label is a death sentence. Sharma did not write it down. She did not have to. Instead, she made a decision. She reassigned the man to a cell occupied by a notoriously violent inmate. She knew the risk. Prosecutors would later argue she expected the outcome. The transfer was not required. It was not random. It violated protocol. That mattered. Once the cell door closed, the system did what she had set in motion. The beating was savage. The victim had no chance to escape. By the time guards intervened, he was already dead. Blunt force trauma, extensive injuries. A killing carried out by one inmate, enabled by someone sworn to protect all of them. Afterward, Sharma did not report the truth. She filed paperwork that minimized the danger. She framed the incident as an unforeseeable act of inmate violence. But federal investigators do not rely on one report. They pull logs, transfer records, patterns. Other officers began talking. The picture sharpened. This was not negligence. This was orchestration. The U.S. Department of Justice stepped in. Civil rights charges followed. The theory was simple and devastating. By deliberately exposing an inmate to known, lethal danger, Sharma had deprived him of his constitutional right to safety while in federal custody. She did not swing a fist. She used her position instead. And that, prosecutors argued, made the betrayal worse. Her trial took place in Orlando in July 2009. Jurors heard testimony about prison dynamics, about how officers understand exactly what certain cell placements mean. They reviewed records showing Sharma's direct involvement in the move. The defense argued coincidence. The prosecution argued intent. The jury agreed with the prosecution. On October 26, 2009, the verdict became final. Erin Sharma was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A $250,000 fine was added, almost symbolic compared to the sentence itself. The judge spoke about abuse of trust, about how authority inside a prison carries extraordinary power over life and death. This case endures because it strips away excuses. There was no panic, no split-second fear, only choice. Sharma did not lose control. She exercised it. And when the system finally responded, it did so with absolute finality. A life sentence for a woman who never touched the victim, but decided he would not survive the night. Marcus Eberhart, State, Georgia, age 51, sentenced to life. The detail made the Marcus Eberhart case explode across Georgia was not confusion. It was repetition. 18 times. That number followed the trial like a shadow. In 2014, while the country was already on edge after Ferguson, another story quietly formed inside the walls of the East Point Police Department. It did not begin with a violent suspect. It began with a minor arrest, and it ended with a man dying on the floor of a police station. A man named Gregory Towns was taken into custody for a low-level offense. Nothing that required force. He was handcuffed. His hands were behind his back. He was no longer a threat. That part was never disputed. What happened next was, inside the station, Marcus Eberhart, a supervising sergeant, took control. He deployed his taser. Once, then again, over and over. 18 discharges in total. Witnesses later testified that Towns cried out. He begged. He said he could not breathe. There was no attack, no attempt to flee. Still, the shocks continued. Medical experts would later explain how repeated electrical discharges can overwhelm the heart, especially when combined with stress and restraint. Towns collapsed. His heart failed. He died right there, still in cuffs. The timing mattered. Across the country, protests were demanding accountability for police violence. Trust was already thin. When word of Town's death surfaced, it did not sound like an accident. It sounded like excess. And excess is harder to excuse. Investigators reviewed body cam footage, internal reports, and medical findings. The pattern was clear. The taser had not been used to gain control. It had been used after control was complete. In 2015, Eberhart and fellow officer Howard Weems were arrested. The case moved to Fulton County, where prosecutors made a bold decision. They did not charge negligence. They charged murder. Their argument was direct. A taser may be labeled non-lethal, but intent and repetition changed the equation. 18 times was not compliance. It was punishment. The trial concluded in December 2016. Jurors heard testimony from cardiologists, use of force experts, and officers trained on taser protocols. They watched footage showing Towns restrained and helpless. The defense argued procedure. The prosecution argued cruelty. The jury agreed with the prosecution. Eberhart was convicted of first-degree murder. On December 21, 2016, the sentence was handed down. Life in prison with the possibility of parole. A rare outcome for a police officer, especially one who never fired a gun. Weems received a far lighter sentence, 5 years, a reminder of how responsibility concentrates at the top. This case still unsettles people because it collapses a familiar defense. The weapon was not supposed to kill, but authority does not absolve outcome. Eberhart did not lose control in a moment of fear. He exercised it repeatedly, and when the shocks finally stopped, so did Gregory Towns' heart. The badge remained, the trust did not. Nicholas Tartaglione, Alice State, New York, age 58, sentenced to life. What made the Nicholas Tartaglione case feel uniquely brutal was not just the body count. It was the method: control, restraint, interrogation, execution. Every step reflected training that was never meant to be used this way. In 2016, long after he had worn a badge, Tartaglione proved that police skills do not disappear when the uniform comes off. They metastasize. Nicholas Tartaglione had served as an officer with the Briarcliff Manor Police Department. By the time of the murders, he was no longer on the force, but he still operated like law enforcement. The case centered on a drug-related dispute. Money owed, trust broken. In Tartaglione's mind, this was not a negotiation. It was a purge. The primary victim was Martin Luna, along with 3 others connected to the same drug debt. Tartaglione lured them under false pretenses. Once isolated, they were restrained, bound, interrogated. Witnesses later described prolonged torture. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It unfolded over hours, maybe longer. The victims were made to understand what was coming. Then came the executions. One by one. No panic. No struggle for control. Tartaglione knew how to dominate a room. He had done it before with legal authority. This time there was none. 4 people were killed. Their deaths were meant to send a message. Do not cross him. Do not owe him. Do not survive him. For years, the case remained partially obscured. Bodies were found. Rumors circulated. Tartaglione's name surfaced and receded. It wasn't until 2019 that federal authorities closed in. He was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and drug trafficking offenses. As the investigation widened, so did the horror. Evidence revealed not only the killings, but the calculated way they were carried out. The trial in New York concluded in 2023. Jurors heard testimony detailing how Tartaglione restrained the victims, how he controlled the environment, how he ensured compliance before killing them. Prosecutors emphasized one point again and again. This was not street violence. This was enforcement. Illicit enforcement, modeled after policing tactics. The jury did not hesitate. Guilty on all major counts. What pushed the case into public infamy, however, was a detail that surfaced later. While awaiting trial, Tartaglione was housed in the same federal jail as Jeffrey Epstein. For a time, they were cellmates. The connection was grotesque, symbolic rather than causal. Two men accused of vastly different crimes, both representing extreme abuse of power, sharing a cell while awaiting justice. The coincidence only intensified scrutiny. On June 10, 2024, the sentence was handed down. 4 consecutive life sentences. No parole, no reduction, no ambiguity. The judge made clear this was not punishment for a single act, but for a pattern of calculated brutality. Each life taken was counted, separately, permanently. The Tartaglione case endures because it demolishes a comforting illusion. That training equals restraint. That authority equals responsibility. Tartaglione proved the opposite. He took what he learned as a police officer and repurposed it for terror. And when the system finally caught up to him, it did not flinch. 4 lives ended by his hand. 4 life sentences in return. Sidney Dorsey, State, Georgia, age 85, sentenced to life. What made the Sidney Dorsey case feel less like a crime and more like an execution order was the position he held when he gave it. This was not a rogue officer or a moment of panic. This was a sheriff, the top lawman in DeKalb County, a man who understood investigations, witnesses, and exposure. And in 2000, after losing an election, he decided the only way to stay safe was to eliminate the person who had beaten him. Sidney Dorsey had just been voted out of office. The winner was Derwin Brown, a former police officer with a reputation for reform. Brown had made it clear he intended to review Dorsey's administration, contracts, money, corruption. For Dorsey, that promise was not political rhetoric. It was a threat, and he treated it like one. The decision came quickly. Dorsey did not confront Brown. He did not fight the allegations in public. Instead, he used what he knew best: connections, criminal intermediaries, silence. He hired a hitman. The order was simple. Stop Brown before he takes office. Before files are opened. Before questions are asked. On the night of the murder, Brown arrived home. He never made it inside. The shooter was waiting. 12 shots were fired at close range. Brown died at his front door. The violence was blunt, excessive, unmistakable. This was not about intimidation. It was about removal. Georgia lost a sheriff-elect before his first day on the job. At first, the crime shocked the public. A political assassination in a suburban neighborhood. But investigators quickly followed the trail. Phone records, witness cooperation, financial links. The kind of trail Dorsey himself would have known how to follow if the roles were reversed. By 2002, the case collapsed inward. The evidence pointed up the chain, not down, and it stopped at the former sheriff. Dorsey was arrested that year. The trial that followed stripped away any illusion of coincidence. Prosecutors laid out motive with precision. Corruption exposure, fear of prosecution, abuse of authority. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated act to protect power. In August 2002, the jury returned guilty verdicts on murder and corruption charges. There was no hesitation. The sentence matched the gravity. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder. An additional 23 years for related offenses. The court made its position clear. This was not just a killing. It was a betrayal of public trust at the highest level. A lawman who became the architect of a murder conspiracy. What lingers about Sidney Dorsey is not just the brutality of Derwin Brown's death. It is the clarity of intent. Dorsey did not stumble into violence. He ordered it. He weaponized his knowledge of the system to try to escape it. And when the system finally turned on him, it did so without mercy. This case stands as a warning carved in stone. When power is treated as personal property and accountability as an enemy, the result is not governance. It is organized crime wearing a badge. And in this instance, The law answered with a sentence that ends only with death behind bars. Mathias Bachmeier, State, Washington, age 78, sentenced to life. The crime of the Mathias Bachmeier case feel unreal was not a crime born of rage or impulse. It was a plan. Slow, deliberate, built by a man trained to investigate scenes just like the one he would later try to fake. In 1996, Mathias Bachmeier, a sergeant with King County Police, was drowning in personal financial trouble. Debt, pressure, desperation. Instead of asking for help, he chose deception. And then murder. The fire came first. Bachmeier set his own house ablaze, intending to collect insurance money. But arson alone would not hold. Investigators would ask questions. So he decided the fire needed a culprit, someone to blame, someone who could not speak back. That decision sealed the fate of James Wren. Bachmeier used what he knew best: authority, procedure, control. He abducted Wren under false pretenses. There was no lawful reason, no warrant. Just a badge and a voice people were conditioned to obey. Once Wren was isolated, Bachmeier forced him to write a confession letter, claiming responsibility for the arson. The handwriting would later become a crucial piece of evidence, not for the reason Bachmeier expected. After the letter was written, Bachmeier killed him. The method was quiet, personal, final. He disposed of the body, believing distance and time would protect him. In his mind, the story was complete. Fire, confession, dead suspect. Case closed. But crimes leave residue. The body was eventually discovered, and when it was, the story began to unravel. The confession letter raised questions. The phrasing, the pressure marks. Forensic analysts noted inconsistencies that suggested coercion. Investigators followed timelines, phone records, witness sightings. Slowly, the focus shifted away from a dead man and toward the one person who had orchestrated every step. Bachmeier was arrested in 1996, the same year as the crime. The shock within law enforcement circles was immediate. This was not a disgraced rookie or a troubled patrolman. This was a sergeant, a supervisor, someone trusted to uphold the law, not manipulate it. His trial took place in Seattle in 1997. Prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative of motive, planning, and abuse of power. Financial records showed desperation. Expert testimony showed staging. And the confession letter, meant to bury the truth, became the rope that pulled it to the surface. The jury convicted Bachmeier of first-degree murder. There was no ambiguity. This was premeditated, calculated, executed with intent. On January 9, 1998, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Washington state, such sentences are rare, reserved for the most severe cases. The court made clear this qualified. What lingers about this case is not just the brutality, but the betrayal. Bachmeier did not merely commit murder. He attempted to weaponize the justice system against an innocent man, even in death. He believed his training made him untouchable. Instead, it exposed him. The very tools he used to commit the crime became the evidence that destroyed him. And in the end, the man who tried to close a case forever became one that will never be forgotten. Len Davis, State, Louisiana, age 61, sentenced to life. One thing that made Len Davis' case feel radioactive from the start was the nickname, RoboCop. That was how people inside the New Orleans Police Department knew him. Not as a joke, as a warning. In 1994, New Orleans was already drowning in rumors of corruption, brutality, and silence. Davis did not hide inside that environment. He thrived in it. And when a civilian threatened to expose him, he chose murder as damage control. Len Davis had been accused of beating a teenage boy. The allegation did not come from another officer or an internal report. It came from Kim Groves, a local woman who filed a formal complaint. That single act made her dangerous. Not because it was false, but because it was documented. Davis understood the system, well enough to know what complaints could become if they survived long enough. He did not confront her. He did not intimidate her directly. Instead, he did something far worse. He used police resources to locate a contract killer. He provided information, address, timing, the kind of operational detail officers are trained to collect. This was not a crime committed in panic. It was planned with the same discipline Davis once claimed to bring to the streets. The hit was carried out cleanly. Kim Groves was shot and killed. The message was unmistakable. Witnesses disappear. Complaints die with them. For a brief moment, it looked like Davis might get away with it. This was New Orleans in the mid-1990s. Trust in the department was thin. Fear was thick. But Davis underestimated one thing. Federal attention. The FBI had already been watching. Wiretaps were in place. Conversations were recorded. When the tapes surfaced, they did not suggest innocence or misunderstanding. They revealed intent, coordination. A police officer arranging a murder to silence a civilian. Davis was arrested in 1994. This time, the badge did not slow the process. It accelerated it. The case moved to federal court. Prosecutors charged Davis with civil rights violations and murder. Their theory was simple. Kim Groves was killed because she exercised her right to report police abuse. That made her death not just a homicide, but an attack on the justice system itself. The jury agreed. Davis was convicted. The sentence was severe. Death row. For years, Len Davis sat under a death sentence. His case became a symbol of unchecked power, of what happens when law enforcement becomes its own criminal enterprise. Long after Hurricane Katrina exposed the depth of corruption within the NYPD, Davis's name was still spoken as proof that the rot had deep roots. Then, in 2024, the outcome shifted. After decades on death row, Davis's sentence was commuted. Joe Biden reduced the punishment to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The execution was canceled. The sentence remained permanent. That change did not soften the case. If anything, it sharpened it. Len Davis would not die by the state, but he would never walk free. The woman he silenced never got that chance. This case endures because it strips policing of its last excuse. Davis did not act in fear. He acted to protect himself. And in doing so, he proved exactly why Kim Groves was right to speak up. James Ashby, State, Colorado, age 42, sentenced to 16 years. In 2014, in the small town of Rocky Ford, Colorado, a young man riding a skateboard was mistaken for something more dangerous than he was. That mistake, carried forward without pause or verification, ended a life inside a place that should have been safest the victim's own home. James Ashby was an officer with the Rocky Ford Police Department. That night, he believed he was following a burglary suspect. What he was actually watching was Jaquez, a local man skateboarding through his neighborhood. Jaquez was not running from police. He was going home. Ashby followed anyway. There was no radio call confirming a crime, no warrant, no report of an armed suspect. Still, Ashby trailed Jaquez to his residence. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but the decisions behind it stretched much longer. Ashby entered the home without announcing himself. No knock, no warning, no verbal command. From behind, he fired his weapon. One shot. Fatal. Jaquez was unarmed. He never saw it coming. The shock was immediate. Not just because a civilian was dead, but because of where and how it happened. Inside a private residence. No confrontation. No visible threat. In a small town, word spreads fast. And this one spread with disbelief. Police shootings in Colorado rarely resulted in criminal convictions, especially when officers claimed they were acting in the line of duty. This case was different. Ashby was arrested almost immediately. Prosecutors in Otero County did not frame the shooting as an unfortunate accident. They framed it as a reckless decision fueled by assumption. During the trial, Jurors heard testimony about use of force standards, about the obligation to identify oneself, about the difference between suspicion and certainty. They also heard what was missing. No warning, no command, no justification for lethal force at that moment. In June 2016, the jury returned a verdict that stunned many in law enforcement circles. James Ashby was found guilty of second-degree murder. It was a rare outcome for a police officer in Colorado, especially one who had claimed he was responding to a potential crime. The conviction alone sent a message, but the sentence complicated it. On October 27, 2016, Ashby was sentenced to 16 years in prison, with credit for 133 days already served. Not life, not decades beyond reach. 16 years. For some, it felt like accountability. For others, it felt like restraint. The court acknowledged the death, the error, the irreversible outcome. But it also reflected the lingering leniency, often extended to officers acting under the banner of duty. This is why the case still unsettles people. Jack Jacques did nothing illegal that night. He went home. He crossed his own threshold, and he was killed without a word spoken to him. Ashby did not hunt with malice. He acted on assumption, and in policing, assumption can be just as deadly. The conviction proved that the law could reach an officer. The sentence reminded everyone how carefully it still does. These cases do not end when the verdicts are read. They linger because they force an uncomfortable truth. Trust can be fatal when power goes unchecked. The victims did not choose their killers. They were assigned to them. Remember their names. Question authority when it demands silence. And if something feels wrong, say it early. Because every case you just watched began with a moment that could have been stopped, but wasn't.